Hi guys, good morning if you're joining me in the US. Good afternoon if you're joining me from Israel. I hope you guys are having a wonderful weekend so far. I know Doe and I are. Today we are going to be working on this foggy lake landscape. It's not too hard, but it does take some dexterity and patience. So once again, drying time is always a challenge. And excuse me while I share this real quick so as many people can watch as possible, because that'd be great. All right, here we go. Now I'll be able to see what you guys have going on. Hey Carrie, good morning, how are you? All right, so this is what we're working on. We're working on a simple wet and wet landscape with pine trees. You don't need to be an expert to do this. You just need to be a beginner. I'm going to walk you through it step by step. As always, I'm going to tend to break the page that I've got into two sections so you can see, one, how different the same watercolor template can be so you don't feel self-conscious, and two, just because the game with watercolor is always just a game of drawing. So the very first thing I'm going to do right now is cut the page in half. And since we're going to be working with these big wet washes, we're doing wet and wet today. So what that means is, you see how I've got like my little handy dandy reference sheet here. When you paint wet and wet, the colors tend to bleed together, and that's how we get this softness here. But when you do wet on dry, like these pine trees right here, it's glazing over top. Because you're doing wet on wet, it's a lot of wet area. So if you are going to do two sides along with me, I'm going to divide the paper in half with painter's tape just to give myself, okay, so apparently this paper's 12 inches. Once again, whatever you're working with is great. Again, hi Otal, how are you? Once again, if you guys have watched with me before, I'm going to keep reviewing the basics for anyone who's a first timer. I always like to use a nice hard pencil. The 6H is one of my favorites because it erases very easily. A charcoal pencil is very soft, so it breaks down and leaves a very strong mark. This is a very hard pencil, therefore it leaves a light line and erases easily. Anyways, so halfway down the paper, once again, you don't have to paint two of them. I'm just doing it for an example. And then I like to use the painter's tape. You can see that clean release there. You can use, hi Bernie, how are you? You can use, that's about right. You can use masking tape. It's more prone to tear. There is more fancy painter's tape, like, artist painter's tape, not just like, house painter's tape, blue house painter's tape. But I'm sure you guys probably don't have painter's tape, and masking tape is prone to tear. You do want, however, so something I'm using here today and that you probably have because it's more common, is I have cold press paper. So cold press means it has bumps and ridges. If you run your fingers over it, you can kind of look and see the ridges and the bumps. So what that means is, if you are splitting your paper in half, make sure to take something smooth and run along the edges. That way the water won't get underneath, because that is a very likely thing to happen. So in this instance, it doesn't matter too much, but it's not bad practice just to get used to it. All right, I'm going to tuck these under. There we go. All right, so once again, like I have done the past couple of times, I'm going to do two pieces, both for drying time and for reference. All right, let's get this sucker started. Excuse me while I reference my notes, guys. All right, so going back to the reference of what we made before, you can see that the first thing we're going to do is fill in the sky, the background, in like this kind of foggy mountain area. And then we need to wait for this to completely dry so we can get this nice crisp line later. But you can see that, I don't know if you can tell, maybe my clear ruler will help, maybe not. This is about 4 inches tall here on the reference. The sky comes down a little more than halfway. So if you're looking for measurements for reference in that way, if you need to, draw a line a little more than halfway down. That'll give you a nice tall sky here, like at the bottom. So I'm gonna start with that. Once again, using my hard pencil. All right, so my paper is 9 inches tall. I don't know how tall yours is. So 4.5 would be halfway. I'm gonna say, yeah, I'll just do 5. That way it's still, bigger than half. It's still there. Okay. So, this is where we're gonna do a wet and wet wash. So a wet and dry wash means that we would just take the brush, dip it right into the paint, and then just go to town. But for wet and wet wash, in order to get this really nice, wet, smooth, foggy look, you want to put clean water on the paper first, and then you can start adding the colors. So a good way to do this is with a nice big flat brush. Mine is a little on the small side. I have bigger ones, but they're actually way too big. I have ones that are like the size of my hand, and that's not necessary for this piece. All right, so something I always tell you guys, again, repeating myself, you are gonna have 2 cups of water. I, on the other hand, am spoiled. I have a fancy painter's cup. You're gonna have 1 cup for rinsing and 1 cup of clean water. This is where you get all of the color off from the previous piece area that you work on. And this is where you get clean water so that you don't muddy up the colors in the next. Since we are just using pretty much the same color the whole time, it's not as big of a deal, but it is a good practice to do no matter what. All right. So once again, first thing we want to do is, because we want a wet on wet application here, you're just going to take clean water and just wet it all the way down. But actually, before we do that, because once you put water on the paper, it's a commitment. If you haven't mixed your color yet, now's a really good time to do that. So I'm gonna put that aside. All right, so I admit, this is the first one that I put together. I cheated and used a very nice watercolor paint. But since then, I've been trying to do things that you can mix from your basic colors. So once again, cool yellow, warm yellow, cool blue, warm blue, cool red, warm red, cool green, warm green, and then black and brown up here. So on this one, I cheated. I used this fancy Payne's gray that I like. You don't probably have that. So what I would suggest is mixing a cool blue with your black, and that will bring it down a little bit. So, I actually already did it earlier just to double check, because once again, I cheated. So I'm gonna mix this before I put the wet on the paper. So here's the cool blue with the black. And once again, I love color mixing, and this is where half the fun is for me. Something you'll want to keep in mind is whatever you mix together, well, a couple things. One, whatever you mix together, anticipate the final dried color to be 30% lighter than the wet color once you apply it, okay? Get that all together. Yeah, that's pretty dark. Another thing is, and I'm remembering this because I made this mistake just now, is I put way too much dark color in. Now I'm trying to bring it down with the light color. The best thing to do is you start with the light color and very slowly add the dark color. So now this is taking me longer than I meant, but it is being a good lesson right now. So all works out. All right, here we go. Once again, we are just going to do wet and wet. We're going to stop at that little over halfway point right here, and then go from there. So we're also going to want it to be tilted. So some artists are fancy and have tilted boards. I don't. So the fancy thing we're going to do is I'm just going to put my roll of painter's tape underneath here. And what this does is, with the wet on wet, it helps the water to roll down with gravity. So this is our cheapo artist easel. Aren't we high tech here? But I guess we can just say hashtag coronavirus or something. I don't know. All right. clean water. I don't know what the weather's like wherever you guys are, but it's actually really nice here today. With the exception of going out for groceries yesterday. I've been in the house since Friday. It's actually kind of nice to hear the kids playing outside. Okay. Looks like right down to that pencil line, great. Got it all wet, and sometimes I actually go back with clean water at the very top again. Just because it's amazing how fast this stuff can dry. All right, so we're gonna go back in that blue and black mix that we did and just put a little bit on the brush. It really isn't a whole lot, but I'll try and show you before this dries out. A little bit goes a long way, and once again, it is a lot easier to add more than it is to undo it. Yeah, that's about what I want. I just want a very light color right now. So all we're doing right now is we're doing a wet and wet wash. So this dark spot right here, we're not worried about that right now. We're just doing the background color. We will add the Foggy Mountains here in a second. All right. And once again, this is more important when you're doing this as a, it's slipping my mind. Wet on dry. So if the paper is dry, it's more important to overlap the last layer. That way you don't have lines. It's not as important here, but it is, once again, it's a good habit to have, and it leads to consistency. Okay. Now we're gonna have to work fast. There we go. And we'll get that sucker going. Awesome. Okay, all still wet. All right, we're working fast. Now, we didn't use much paint then. We're going to use more paint now. So I'm using that straight edge. And remember, we can paint sideways like this, or we can use the razor tip like this. I'm going to use the razor tip. And this is the part we're going to have to start controlling the angle of the paper. That's why I'm holding it in my left hand. So you'll see that if I blot, the color tends to travel. However, if I drag the tip, it doesn't travel as much. You see that? And as soon as I release, it tends to jump up. I'm sure there's a very good reason for it. Maybe something physics, maybe something molecular, I don't know. All I know is that that's the case, and that's not what I want it to do. All right, I want to make sure this is nice and wet. And remember, I know that this is gonna dry 30% lighter. Acrylic is opposite. Acrylic likes to dry darker. Watercolor is not that way. Okay. Now you gotta move fast, and you gotta move while the paper is still wet. All right, I want this line to be a little bit darker. I think I'm actually gonna add a little more black here. Ooh, that might have been too much black. Artistic license, right guys? Back me up on this. Okay. And in this wet and wet wash, ideally it will, you can see I'm fussing with it. That's kind of dangerous because I may get a kind of back run. Now back run, I will show you in a second once I have this put together. It is where, yeah, let's do a little more down here. It's where the page does not dry evenly, mostly because you probably put too much stuff at the last minute. Therefore, you made an area wetter than it should have been at the last minute. Now, sometimes you can do it for a good effect. It's hard to control, but it does make things look different. Okay. I am going to leave this alone right now. I may darken this up here in a little bit, but now I want this to dry. You have seen me use a hairdryer in the past. I'm not planning to do that here, because it has a tendency, of course, to push the paint while it's still wet. Not really looking for that, especially with something like this. So let me show you real quick what back run is. For Lucky, we won't have to see what it is in here. So I'm just trying to, I'm fiddling. You may want to fiddle too. Honestly, that's the best way to learn, even if it screws up. All right. So of course I did this 4 different times. In this one, you can see how it's nice and smooth. There isn't a whole lot of difference. That's because I worked while everything was still very, very wet. Now the problem is, when I came down to this one, I got a little bit lazy and I did this last part when it was still, you're still doing okay down here? Okay. And if you want, you can play around with the paper and tilt it. Especially when the paper is really wet like this, it's gonna have a tendency to warp with ripples. You can work with that. Once again, watercolor is really unpredictable and you either love it or you hate it, but it's just the way it is. So I'm trying to see what I want to do here. Anyways, back run is this line I've got going on. It's not as bad as some other back runs can be, but because I started adding the dark stuff a little too late, this wasn't quite white enough, this dried at a completely different pace. So therefore there's a line instead of this smooth transition. This should still transition smoothly. Okay, so while that's drying, you can do this as well if you want. I actually want to do, green is my favorite color. So, because I'm here to enjoy myself and have fun, I'm actually going to do an olive green color over here. You know, why not? Trees are green. It sounds like Ireland, and I liked how the other one turned out, the mountains, when I did the green. So what I'm doing for that one is, while the other one dries especially, once again, watercolor is a big game of waiting for things to dry, or else painting in areas that, all right, you're liking to puddle in that place in the middle. All right. Okay, so I've already dipped my brush in the green, so I'm rinsing it off in the rinse cup, and then getting it in the clear water so that it doesn't fuck things up. Okay, I'm gonna try and add a little more color there. And I actually won't be mad if it does some background. It can have a cool effect. It's just hard to control. But the more I fuss with it, the more likely that is. All right, so I want to make olive green. So I am adding my warm green, a little bit of my cool green, just mostly because I love the phthalo green I have. I'm also going to add some brown to warm it up. Oh my, the phthalo green basically took over, guys. How is yours drying? Is it drying evenly? Is it doing what you thought it would do? Are you still fussing with it? Once again, let me get this color where I want it to be. Okay, that's more like it. A nice olive green. That's better. My roommates in college will attest to the fact that like 50% of my wardrobe in college was olive green. It matches everything. I already, have brown hair, whatever. It worked. Sorry. Also, I'm assuming that a lot of this video will have just my bangs in it, so sorry about that. Okay. So, I'm kind of watching the angle on this one. All right, that's still shiny. It's still drying. And once again, you can tilt the paper to get the color to move. Can you see that? See how the color's moving around? See how it's traveling back toward the corner? Oh God, now it's traveling over the tape. Here we go. Oh God. Once again, if you don't mind it having a certain effect, it's not a big deal. But, okay. All right, so doing this again in olive green. And so the first thing we want to do, since it's a wet and wet wash, is on this other side, we will do just nice, clean water. And again, since it's wet on wet, as the paper gets saturated like this, don't be surprised when it starts to warp and wrinkle. That's normal. It does make it harder to deal with. There are fancy ways to tape and combat it. Quite honestly, I am not well versed in them, and especially in pieces like this, I kind of like seeing how everything turns out. Okay, got the wet and wet here. Great. Make sure that's nice. Flows well. Okay, now I'm doing olive green on this one. Remember, for this wet and wet, a little bit goes a long way. Yeah, there we go. That's nice. Again, I'd encourage you to try different colors. It's like, do purple. I actually almost did purple just because I figured that'd be a nice atmospheric look. But the other day I did that mountain piece, and I did one of them in blue, and I did one of them in green, and the ones in green actually turned out really nice. So since this has mountains too, I figure that makes sense to try it here. Alright. I'm kind of cheating. It should be going both directions. I don't know if you can see me like holding the paper down a little bit here, but because it's buckling, I'm trying to counteract that a little bit. Okay. Alright, come on now. It's something you'll learn as you work with your paints. Different colors have different materials. Different brands also behave differently. The blue that I just worked with went on pretty smooth. This, I feel like, is behaving a little bit differently. So, but that is normal. Alright, that's still wet. So once again, gotta work fast while it's still wet. We're gonna get a much darker color on the brush from the same puddle. Once again, you can use these flat brushes like this or like this. We're using the blade edge. We're dragging instead of picking up. Ooh, that's very light. As soon as we pick up, you see how it does that? So you can blot if you want to, but you won't get as much of a thin line. But the good thing is, since we have that stopped right there with the wash ending about halfway down the page, the good news is it'll have a nice line for us, except for this point apparently where it went over the line. That's fine. We can work with that and kind of correct it later on. Okay, so I want to get this a little bit more. Do want to drag here. Remember, watercolor will dry 30% lighter than you putting it on. So I think I want that mountain to be bigger. So we're going to take a gamble and move it up a bit. Get a bigger slope. Okay. Once again, I've got the paper at kind of an angles to help keep the water down at the bottom. You can also tip and move the paper as you see fit. To move the water around with gravity. Remember, you want to work quickly, or else you'll get backruns, which means the paper and the paint will dry at different speeds, and it'll cause hard lines to form. So part of the magic, honestly for me, with watercolor is these gradual transitions. So if you want that gradual transition, you need to work quickly while the paper is still very wet. Yeah, that's still very wet. That might take some time. So, all right. So, I'm actually going to cheat a little bit on this. That way I can show you what to do. You don't have to do this. I'll put the green over here a little bit. Okay. And once again, having my little ghetto painter's tape under here keeps an angle going where like the water stays down, which helps. Okay, so this is getting there. I'm gonna let that keep drying for a second, but I know that these puddles of paint, as those accumulate, it'll leave a nice strong color, but it's gonna take a while for it to get to that point where it dries. So, I really don't want to use a hairdryer. In real life, I would just let it sit and dry. Something else you could do, and I will just use this as an example on the scrap piece of paper, is you may have that there and not want it, okay? So I'm going to show you something called a thirsty brush. All right, so we're going to use this scrap paper. I'm going to hold it at an angle so that you can see the paint coming down. All right, you see that dark line at the bottom? Make sure you can see it. Whoa, it's kind of close to the camera. All right, so here's something you can do. Ooh. It can affect the smoothness of the application. I tend to avoid it as much as I can. If you're quick, sometimes it works all right, but what you can do is you can take a dry brush. So this one I've blotted off on a paper towel, and you can lift with the brush. See how that's soaked up? Yeah, I'll show you again. You can lift with the brush. Okay? I'm actually going to show you the thirsty brush on here, but first, because I have my brush in the purple, I'm going to rinse it off in the rinse cup, put it in the clean water, get it nice and dry now that it's clean. Lift a little bit of the blue. Okay? Lift a little bit of the blue. Once again, it probably will have an effect on the final colors. So that's up to you. In a foggy piece like this, I don't think it's that big of a deal. Especially because I'm someone who likes these effects. Speaking of which, all right, rinse, clean water. I'm actually gonna try and move that up a little bit. Get a little more level in this green mountain in the background. And I may get a background from it, which once again is that hard line, but it's okay. Oops. Oh, I just may get dots like that too. Oh, that's interesting. There you go. That's your lesson if you screw around. I may get creative and turn those into birds later. That's one thing that watercolor does. It's so hard to correct things that you can get pretty good at problem solving. Because it's almost impossible to remove something after it's on there. All right. Now yours probably isn't dry yet either. That's okay. You can wait until it's perfectly dry and then just come back to this later, or you're welcome to follow along. So what you can see is I painted this one. Ideally, you would leave it to fully dry so it has a nice clean line. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna do another wet and wet wash, very light on the opposite side, and then you're gonna try and reflect in a lighter version. You want it to be lighter you know, because you think about it, like something reflected in a lake usually isn't quite as vivid as the real mountain. So we'll come back and do another wet and wet wash down here and very lightly try and mimic the shape of the mountain above in the water. So here's how I'm gonna cheat. So something I'm gonna actually use a future lesson to show this to you. This is a lesson I'm gonna do next weekend, and you can see that there's a white space between the lines. Because of that, you can make this very, very quickly because you don't have to worry about things fully drying. So sometimes I cheat and I leave a little bit of white space. Now, something you may be able to do later is then go back and use a much darker line on the piece. And call it a horizon line. Anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. You can start too if you want. If not, that's okay. Rinse, clean water, and then another wet and wet wash. Here we go. And I'm gonna get close to the horizon, but not quite there because I don't want it bleeding in. I don't want to take away from that line. I'm trying to see where my brush is. There we go. Sometimes what I do is I'll put a little bit of the tint I know I'm going to be using, just so I can see what the heck I'm doing. Just trying to see clear water on white paper is not always easy. Keep going. That wet and wet. Alright, and in the same way that we did up top, you got all of that wet. Once again, I like to kind of go over the top one more time, just because that has a tendency to get a little dry even as you move your way down. Once again, just very light with the same color. And do a wet and wet wash. Okay, maybe a little bit darker than that. Come on. Alright, here we go. Once again, we're just putting a very light wash. This is our lake. You can wait until your piece is completely dry before you move to this next step. It is easier, but if you want, you can leave a thin white line. You can call that your shore, or you can go back later and put a nice dark solid line after everything is fully dry, but this kind of helps you get through the actual piece faster. Okay. This. Keep that going. Alright. All of that is painted in. I use this. Again, I'm pretty sure this is a little bit drier up top because as you go down, just time's against you. So, you're going to get a little bit darker pigment. Not as dark as up here. Remember, all we're doing is we're trying to do a slightly lighter reflection in the lake below. So once again, drag along that line and then start mimicking the shape of what it was doing up top. There we go. Remember, whatever you paint will be 30% lighter at the end. I'm trying to keep that in mind. I think I might want this to be a little bit darker. So you'll notice that your because remember the paper is angled down in the beginning, you had the water running into a dry line, so that kept it contained. This is a little different, but once again, this is a reflection in a lake, so we're okay with it being a little more loosey-goosey, but we do want to make sure we're working while it's wet. That way it has a nice smooth transition. Okay. Going to darken up that top line one more time. Maybe blot a little bit for a little more color. Oops, I'm writing too much, that's okay. There we go. Hopefully, since that's just one smooth application, that should dry a little bit faster than up top. And once again, it's just a waiting game. Now this one we won't be able to cheat on. In order to do these pine trees, the lake and the top will have to be completely dry in order to get those crisp lines and those crisp reflection lines. There's just no way around it. So I'm gonna let that sit. I'm gonna move on to the next section. And hopefully the blue will dry in a good manner. So, once again, rinse, clean water, wet and wet wash without touching the top layer. If you are continuing to work while it's wet. Again, since you know it's going to be green, you can always add a little bit of green to it. That way you can see what the heck you're doing, where your water is, or you can do like I am right now and look from a super weird angle to try and catch the shine of where the clear water is. But it is a pain in the butt. And I apparently have a small cat hair in there. Okay. All right. Clean wash all the way down. Okay. I'll go again over the top layer, just to make sure it's all wet. All right. Now once again, doing a light wash with that same color I used up top. I'm basically just doing a mirror image of above. So in the same way like with the sky. I actually like how that white line is in there, it's nice. I'll have to do that intentionally now. Just take a little bit of pigment, and I know I keep repeating things if you watch, but just in case, just for emphasis, it's gonna dry. What percentage is it gonna dry lighter? It's gonna dry 30% lighter. So keep that in mind as you're painting this. So if you actually want it to be this light, great, you've succeeded. In case you can't hear, our neighborhood cat Cola is at the door looking for attention. But I gave her milk earlier, so she'll be okay. Alright, have I got all that green in there that I need? I think so. Oops. That top is still wet. Alright, and once again, we don't want it to be as dark as the top layer, but we do want to do a reflection. Start with dragging the brush instead of blotting it, because dragging it doesn't seem to release as much. Once again, I'm not exactly sure how it works. I just know that's how it works. Alright, drag this over here. Okay. Keep so much lighter. Oh wow, apparently that lake goes all the way down to the bottom. Okay. Alright. Oh, that's actually nice. The brown seems to be coming through a little bit in the wash. Once again, these are the fun parts of watercolor. It's just not predictable. Oh, I'm looking at my other camera right now. Looks like my head's in your way. Sorry about that, guys. And once again, you can see how like it comes down along the border. If you guys do decide to frame these, the good news is you're always going to overlap the edge a little bit. So if you got something funky going on at the edges, don't lose too much sleep over it. Okay. I think I'm going to take a risk on the blue side and use the hairdryer. I typically wouldn't do that, but I'd like to keep walking you through this without you staring at a blank screen, because I've already cheated and showed you thirsty brushes. So I'm going to do this gently on a low setting. See if we can't speed this along. And also try and protect this other side, because if it's more wet, it's more prone to move, and it's more prone to get a little funky. So I'm going to leave that one be for now. I may come back and dry in a second. If you can hear me, you can kind of see how I'm focusing on the spots where there's the most paint puddled. I want those spots to dry. Once again, using the hairdryer like this does change the final effect. And if you're not careful, it could move things where you don't want to go. But I'm doing it so that you're not just literally watching paint dry. I'm actually going to check something first. Told you that down here would dry faster and that these puddles would stay wet longer. They are staying wet longer. The thing that I'm most concerned about right now is having a place where I can draw the land in. So it looks like all of this right here is perfectly wet and ready for at least that step, and that's fine. There are places where we need to overlap up top. Once again, we've got this island about a third of the way down in the lake, and the pine trees are overlapping the horizon. Looks like I do need this one to dry before I can get this where I want it to be. So bear with me while I do that real quick. Once again, it's all a drying game in watercolor. Whee! And this is why when I'm working on my personal stuff, I'm always working on multiple pieces at once, because I'll apply something in one piece, let that dry, and then move on to another piece. That way I'm not just sitting waiting for things to be ready to be worked on. I'm always working on multiple things. You can ask my sweet boyfriend, there's always stuff all over the place. If you're still watching, congratulations, you're officially watching paint dry. I hope that amuses you. Come on, you're so close. Ugh. This is where watercolor tries my patience. Alright, that's good for now. It still has a little bit of a shine on it, but that's not too bad. It's kind of a matte shine at this point. Also, when you have a lot of pigment in one space, it tends to get this almost sheen to it. It's not really a good example on here, but sometimes when the paint puddles in a single spot, it almost looks like it's still wet, but it's not. All right. So, in here, the island starts about 1/3 of the way down. If you want to eyeball it, great. If you want a reference, that's fine too. So this is about 4 inches. So 1, 2, I'm gonna put it about right. A little below this 1 inch spot. Once again, the paint is dry. I'm using a very hard pencil to make a light mark. And here we go. All right. So far, I've been using this flat brush, either this way or that way. You still can use it this way if you really want to. That's fine. I tend to prefer the control of tiny round brushes. I'm also used to working, you know, for example, with very, very tiny brushes. I get very detailed. So in this sense, I'm gonna do a round brush just so you can see that. Man, that really buckled with the wet, didn't it? That's what happens when you use a lot of water. All right, I actually kind of need to hold this down, I guess. Or better, my life would be not the same without binder clips. I need them like all the time now that I do watercolor. Wow, that's really buckled. That's unusual. All right, that's better. That'll help it keep from rolling too much. Okay. There it is. All right, so once again, we're just working in the same colors. I've got a very light pencil line right there. I don't know if you can see it, but that's the point. It's so light that only you can see it and use as a reference. You can take the flat edge of your flat brush, or you can take the skinny tip of a round brush like I'm doing. And you're gonna come out about 3/4 of the way across the page. It's a nice amount of pigment. And by pigment, I mean a lot of paint in the water. If it's less pigment, it means there's more water compared to the paint. Okay. Get this island going. Make sure it's nice and dark. And you can see how I kind of have it tapering down to a point. It's a little bit thicker over here. And then where the island comes to a point. You can even do a little bit like a little bit of layers like that. Like where it's puddles or something like that. Or rocks maybe, kind of an illusion. Alright, nice island. Alright, now I'm actually, because I want more details, I'm going to move to a smaller round brush. So I want this overlapping the horizon. So you can see I basically have 5 pine trees. One big one pretty close to the middle, and then a couple others. So that's what we're going to do. So again, I want to go over the horizon line. I actually want this to be smooth and make sure that I'm working on these. There we go, come on. Oh, it's still wet enough to fill in. And all you're doing for the trees is you can kind of fill in like a triangle base if you want, just dot, dot, dot as you go. And this so you know how you want the cone of the tree to be. I want you to let some of the background shine through. We're going to put another layer on later. This gives it more texture, it makes it more interesting. Instead of just a flat shape, I want you to let the background shine through on this. Basically, if you need to do like a dotted line for reference, no problem. Okay. And just keep blotting. The smaller the brush, of course, the smaller the blot, and the round brush gives a much more organic blot, and that's part of why I like it. You can use the corner of the flat brush with some success. And try also to kind of make it not quite such a perfect triangle, like do a little funkiness with the branches, make it a little wonky if you need to. And you also, of course, want the trunk to be a little bit thicker. You're also going to want to have grass in there, so bring that up as well. Let's fill this sucker in. Once again, if you can avoid it being perfectly symmetrical, that's good. That's more organic. It looks more correct in a landscape for things to not be completely symmetrical. Once again, let the light shine through. Overlap things, don't make them completely mirror image. Have some good blades of grass. Keep it going. Now we're coming over that wet spot, but it looks like it dried just well enough. Something I don't know if you can tell, but because I don't know if you can tell in this picture, but sometimes when you are painting over a spot that was painted before, sometimes even those microscopic ledges left from the paint layers from before, sometimes they'll do funky things to how your paint moves and flows. I'm saying that because I just ran into that here with where this transition from the mountain to the horizon line to the lake. I think I'm gonna do one more little guy right here just to overlap. Alright, a little more grass. Alright. Like I said, it's nice having the kids out there right now. Alright, so we've got that all put in. Now, I used this brush for the smaller details. I'm gonna come back to this and use this when I go to give the trees more dimension, more depth. But right now, what I want is I want a bigger brush for a softer touch for these shadows right here, or reflections, I guess. So we're gonna do a softer wash here. If you want, you can stop there, or you can add this texture here in that last step. But for now, I'm gonna do I want it to be pretty watery. Once again, it is a lot easier to make it darker than it is to make it lighter. So once again, if this hasn't dried for you yet, make sure that you don't touch the island. Just come along here similar to what you did before, but this time it's wet on dry. The other one moved around a lot more because it was wet on wet, obviously. And then you're just gonna kind of scribble back and forth with your brush. Okay. I kind of do vague ripply shapes, so I don't mind them being scribbly. You know, there's waves moving, it's motion. I actually think I want my little island to come out more. And I think I want this tree to be taller. So I'm gonna do that. All right. Except for those parts. I'm actually gonna drop in some more color here, guys. Because of the wrinkling, which I'm sure you're running into too. Instead of being uniform, the paint is pooling, so I'm trying to disperse it a little bit, but it's kind of hard to do. That's okay, I'll come back and finish that. Okay, remember we had to dry this one a little bit. We're gonna do that here to help with these spots. You guys remember Thirsty Brush? Take a nice clean brush. Make sure it's dry. And then it sucks it up like a little sponge. It does have an effect on the final texture, but it also does help things dry faster, so you kind of have to pick your poison. Second verse, same as the first. So, I'm going to take that big round brush and draw the island about in the same spot. I've got a reference point. Using a lot of pigment versus there we go. Oh, my head might be in the camera for this guy, sorry. So yeah, try and use a lot of paint to help it stand out. And try and add like little make it uneven here at the end, kind of showing, you know, kind of at a creek's edge where things overlap. Or like, you know, stepping stones and stuff. Okay, all right. I'm gonna put this nice big tree right here. I think I made the other one too fat, so I'm gonna make this one a little bit skinnier. Once again, I want background coming through. I'll touch up here in the next layer, but in order to make it look more realistic, because remember, trees let light through. use a smaller brush for the grass. Okay. Come back and do another tree. And again, you can do whatever trees you want to. And make it a little chubbier. By the way, the word for Hebrew, the word in Hebrew for chubby is shmanman, and it's my favorite Hebrew word. My boyfriend's in the background laughing at me because he knows that that's my favorite Hebrew word. So there's your free Hebrew lesson for today. Shmanman means chubby. And can you see now why I might love it? All right, leaving that nice and open, that's good. Come back with more. I'm gonna drag some of the puddled color over here while it's still wet. I'll actually just do 2 pine trees right there, maybe. And do like another one here. There's no wrong way to do this. We're going to make this one a little off center. So we'll have him come out and more over this way. Once again, I want you to blot so that what's coming, so light can come in from behind. It makes it look more realistic. I'll do one more little short tree. Just a little guy right here. He's a very skinny one. Let's throw some grass in there. Sounds like the neighbor kids are a bit stir crazy and enjoying their time outside. I don't blame them. Okay. All right. Now, once again, second verse, same as the first. You come back, get a much lighter color for this wet in dry reflection. So once again, this was wet in wet, so it was wet paint on a wet surface. This is wet on dry, so it's wet paint on a dry surface, which is different. So once again, if you're doing this while this island is still wet, you don't want it to touch. Just come along here, close to the edge like we did up top. And then make sure you keep working while the paint is still dry. Kind of do like a scribble motion to kind of like show the motion of the waves. Looks like it's kind of dark actually. Darker than I would want, really. Okay, it's alright. Once again, watercolor dries how much? 30% lighter. How many times can I say that, guys? Maybe you can make it a drinking game. Okay. Yeah, that's a lot of pigment. Okay. Alright, and then you leave that to dry. Oops. And you apparently put the pigment in the wrong area. So, I won't finish this green one here, it doesn't look like. And for the blue one, everything is still wet. What I would encourage you to do for more texture is to do a second layer of blotting over top of the leaves. This will just add a glazing effect. It will add, it'll add more texture, make it more interesting. I will show you really quick once that dries, just putting in one more little detail on the reflection of the lake. You don't have to do this. It may be that you like this reflection just well enough and it's not a big, you don't care. Or you can just go ahead and add these lines for an extra layer of texture. So because you just want it to be loose. Oh good, I thought I hadn't cleaned off enough of the green, but it looks like I did. Okay. And the same way you just kind of do loose, you're just trying to think of like, what waves look like. I'm just trying to be organic. Just add a little more texture and depth to make it interesting. There. And a little bit there. Once again, I'm not going to finish this one with you guys. And this one you can go back and once it fully dries, you can add a second layer, or while it's still wet, you can do something interesting and add like a different shade of blue to get like variations. There's a lot of freedom in what you can do with this, but I was just walking you through what it looked like to do, particularly this one. Of course, there's all kinds of variations you can do. Oh, thankfully it looks like these stayed wet enough that I got this smooth transition instead of that back run line. Looks like I pulled that off. I'd be curious for you to share your pieces in the group. I'd love to see what you made and how they turned out. Someone yesterday shared stuff that she did with her kids and it made my freaking day. So now I'm starting to add up a little bit, guys. I want to show you what's available in the group right now. Previously, I've done these lessons. You can find them in the group. I am adding them to YouTube as well, if that's interesting. I did this one for kids a couple of days ago. I had a friend join me with her 6 and 9-year-old. They did a great job with the bumblebees. I was very impressed. This was the first one I did. It's very easy. It's not hard to do. You're just layering glazes. You can use a hairdryer to make it go faster. It actually does pretty well with that. Not hard to do. You can also do this contemporary design. I do have a video in that. I had technical difficulties trying to get fancy with something, but the instructions for this are in there, and I may end up redoing the video for that soon. So that is what's already available. In the near future, I will be doing more videos. I will be going over techniques here soon for textures. So I've been playing around with things like stamping these fern leaves right into the paper, and other background things like using a straw for these effects. I use the mesh from my shower scrubby, which I cut off because I'm weird, for this texture. There's, more of the ferns. Bleach is my current favorite. It does some really interesting things. And this is Windex. This is all focusing on stuff that you can do at home. And this is dish soap. Things that make bubbles really have an interesting effect on how stuff dry. If you look close enough, you can see the shape of the bubbles right there. So we'll be going through how to layer up to get these backgrounds. I have an idea for how I want to use them as far as a project. It'll be more collage than painting, but that'll be fun. I do have more pieces in the future for you. One I just finished putting together last night. I'll get back to that in a second. This will be next Saturday. I'm doing an ombre moon. Because of the stripes, it actually goes pretty fast, so it won't be as time consuming. Hi Leah, how are you? I actually just finished preparing this one. This actually is like watercolor florals with hand lettering. So I'll be showing you how to measure it out, how to pick leaf pieces, how to layer things in a specific way. So I haven't scheduled that one yet. I will be soon. Trying to see if I have anything else. I've always got like a million ideas going for you guys. Once again, feel free to join the group. which is through my artist page, Oxentinder Watercolor. That's the easiest way to stay connected on what the events are. You'll get the most notifications that way. I do have a YouTube channel that I'm starting, if that's an easier place for you to share or follow. And yeah, if you do this, please drop a picture of what you've done in the group. That'd be a lot of fun for me. And if you have any questions, just let me know. I'd love to help. And if you have any comments or requests for things that you'd like to paint in the future, just let me know as well. Anyways, I will let you guys go. I hope you have a wonderful Saturday, and I'll talk to you guys again next Friday. I do have that circle piece scheduled for Saturday, but next Friday I will have something else. I just need to put it on the calendar. So anyways, have a good weekend, guys. Bye.